Scott from the Tampa Pro. Today we have my kind of rough weekend and also a pull session. If you've already been watching, you saw my first pull session, like a backhand mix. Today, I'll walk you through my other pull session. So, yeah, rough weekend, and it was planned to go as smooth as it could. I ended up moving my mom closer to me with health and everything with where she's at. Need to be a little closer to home. So I knew packing up her stuff and moving it. And I had to do it myself because there's a lot of like personal things to have to go through and that I can't have a mover do. So Renee and I went down and packed up a U-Haul, pulled her car behind the U-Haul. If you've moved at all, you know this is like pretty extensive, especially when your daily job is not being a mover. So man, that was pretty rough. We just took 3 days off from the gym to do it. I ran my off day diet. Step count didn't go crazy high, but I still averaged like another 1,000 steps than I normally would for the week. So it was like 10,500. But those steps are some hard steps, just carrying furniture, carrying boxes. So that was definitely reflected in the changes to my physique for the week, and not really for the negative. So last week I was 253, ended up coming down to 258, so 5 pounds. Now, a note on this is that I did forget my GH with me, and that had a pretty large water drop as well, because I came back home and started it again, and then weight shot up to 250, and I was like feeling a little bit more feeling full, but also just noticed like a little bit more like swelling, like water retention basically. And I was like, hey, what's going on here? So then I finally, like, it all kind of clicked together, like, oh yeah, I forgot it down there, had a little bit of extra weight drop, bringing it back in place. Weight kind of came back up to what the normal would be. So probably dropped like 3 to 4 pounds in body fat over the past week. And of course, a little bit more depleted, which is fine. But tightness, conditioning wise, you can see it in my shots. I definitely notice it in my back shot, like less lower back fat. And even on my caliper sights, dropped 2 millimeters off my lower back, 1 millimeter off my upper back and off my glutes. So off 3 sights, a 4 millimeter change, which is really good. Also, just waist is coming in easier to control in my poses too. So just a little bit more details everywhere coming through regarding the posing. So it was a positive push forward in condition, and the move went as smooth as it could go. And just glad to be very, very back home and back in routine. So that's really what's getting executed for this week, is just getting back into the groove of everything. With getting back home, I just continued the same diet that I've been running. Just seeing that weight drop and the weight drop from the previous week really doesn't make a justification to make any caloric changes with pulling food or raising output up. So still on 3,700 calories on train days, 3,000 on my off days. And cardio is still the same, 5 days per week fasted. Treadmill, I have moved up the incline a little bit just to keep heart rate within my target range. So doing like a 9% incline, and then also 3.1 miles per hour. So it's just moved up just slightly. Also for the week, areas that I would like to implement and improve on, just since this last week kind of threw me off with moving, but just to work on more vacuum work. Like for me, my own thing to like curse me in the off season is that I will have a lot more go to my waist, and I will drop several inches dieting down off my waist, and it really impacts waist control in the off season and getting into poses even in the off season. So one thing to really nail this week is getting back into increasing volume in my like fasted vacuum work, and then also doing some post workout too. So doing 2 sessions as I move into prep. I keep it in the off season, but it just doesn't happen as frequently. So having that consistent routine of a non-negotiable, doing it twice a day. Of course, I'll take 1 day off. I take 1 day off just completely on Saturdays anyway. Then also just posing in general, just getting back into posing and going through a couple rounds, just at least a few times a week, so I can start building in that endurance, and also just you kind of lose like what the exact poses and how you want to flex things a little bit. So getting that into like complete routine is also the area that I want to improve on. And the one thing I am changing, which is kind of pre-planned, is just another escalation in PEDs. So adding in 200 milligram of total androgen load. So now sitting at 900 milligram per week. Okay, so on to the pull session for the day. So this is pull session B for me. It's also the day before I train legs. So there's not going to be a lot of axial loading or bent over type row work, loading the spinal erectors. It's all chest supported or vertical pulling, just to save myself for when I do load the back, actually on leg day. So first movement, still for me, priority lats. So that's what's going in. Use a Nautilus lat pull down. I use single arm. Just the positioning that I get in, I can get so much more lat out of it like that than, because I've tried doing it bilateral just to save time, honestly, and it is not the same for me. So having that ability to just scoot over in the machine just a little bit and line up that path with the hip and the lat fibers, for me, it makes a huge difference. The big thing that I see a lot of people do in this single arm movement is they stay very compact and not letting that arm humerus like fully extend forward, and that the lat attaches on the humerus, so allowing some of that translation forward is how you're going to get the lat fully lengthened. So don't just shortchange yourself and staying with a lot of elbow flexion and not letting that humerus rise up, because you'll see I allow that full stretch to happen, and the full stretch in your row movements is where you're going to get a lot of tension. So take advantage of utilizing that execution and cueing for those type of movement patterns. And for this one, I do 3 sets, 8 to 12 reps, and that wraps up pull down movement. Next movement we go to is a prime extreme row. This is upper back bias for me. If you have this machine, just utilize it. It is, in my opinion, one of the best for overall upper back development. Ability to chest brace and also adjust the incline is awesome for one thing, but the big advantage here is being able to load heavy in that lengthened stretch position. So that's why you see a lot of load partition towards the top of the movement. And I don't split it quite 50-50. I probably have maybe 60-70% allocated up towards the top. And you'll know you have it right, because as you get towards that failure point, the reps will get pretty consistent velocity. And normally, like with a row, you almost get like dead stop trying to lock out towards the top. You might fail kind of towards the middle. With this one, you'll actually fail much higher up towards the top of the movement if you have it loaded appropriately. Now, for an upper back bias, what you really want here is to allow some thoracic flexion to happen. So you see I have that rounding of the thoracic, cervical spines going forward, scapulas are fully wrapping around and protracting. And then as I row, simultaneously, I'm also going through thoracic extension and trying to really retract and press those scapulas. So this is how you're going to get that full development in upper back and the traps. But also, people forget, there's all underneath your traps are thoracic extensors, just like you have your big thick like lumbar spinal extensors. Those run all the way up, and you also have like several different thoracic extensors. So this is going to get overall thickness for the upper back. So 3 sets there, still staying in that 8 to 12 rep range. Next movement I go to is a lat bias row, and it's not just necessarily lat bias, because I allow like that scapula to naturally protract, retract. So of course there's going to be some trap involved. This one I've had difficulty setting up, but I really nailed where my setup is on it. And I do prefer single arm still, because with this hammer strength isolateral row, it kind of diverges out, which would really cater to making it harder to get some of the lat involved. So I use single arm, and I am offset a little bit, so I'm rotated if I'm using my right arm like counterclockwise into the machine, so it really lines up the path with that hip. And one hack that I found is, for one, you see these yoga blocks that I use to set in the chest support. And I do that to just scoot myself back. And what that does is when you start pulling on that handle, that load gets heaviest when it's farthest away, right where I have it set. So then as I pull back, some of that load is letting off as that lever arm is coming up higher above the pivot point. And so when the lat is really hard to get short and it's already more fatigued in this session, it's getting some let off with how I have it set up. So and also like you're then able to see this machine, the handle starts dropping downward as you pull back, which is perfectly what you want to cue with the lat bias row, is driving the elbow down towards the hip. So this one is just a beast for lats. I absolutely love it. And to spend time, again, like you'll see, like I allow that lat to stay stretched and just really own that lengthen phase before driving back. Now, with this one, still setup is 3 sets here and staying in that 10 to 15 rep range. So I allow it to go just a little bit higher on this machine. You know, I do, like I mentioned in my last video, like I do 3 sets on these movements because I'll do 2 sets on a back movement and I feel like I'm just getting going in the movement. I'm just getting this great like pump going and connection, and 1 set more is on the money for me. Like after a 4 set, I feel like it's a little bit, I see the performance drop a lot, but 3 sets for myself like is on the money, and it's time efficient as well. See, some people have like 5 different rows, 1 to 2 sets a piece. I think you can be more efficient, and as long as we have our elbow finishing in different positions, that should be sufficient to fully develop the back. So that wraps up the compound work. I then have isolation work, so I moved on to rear delts from there. That would be the higher priority point. And also, before I want to do like trap work, I want to make sure rear delts gets the priority as well. So I do the prime reverse fly. Setup on this one, I do have the camber set on a 5, so it loads heavy off the LinkedIn right at the stretch and lets off towards the shorten phase. And I do lean forward, and with this leaning forward, you change that finish point for the humerus to finish kind of right below the shoulder, which gives you a much larger range of motion than if you are out at 90 degrees. You'll notice if like you put your arms at 90, you reach kind of this stop point. Some people get some like shoulder impingement and feels like things are binding. If you just drop just a little bit below that, you'll notice you'll get more shoulder extension in the movement and more ability to retract the scapula as well too. So that's why you have that little bit of lean forward. So 3 sets there. Stay pretty close to the 15 rep mark on that movement. Next movement, I do a dumbbell shrug just to get some extra trap work in, a little bit more focus for upper traps. Just 2 sets here. Just cueing is to drive up, shoulders as high as possible, and do a slight hold and just try to control the reps. It's really easy on shrugs just to like go through and just kind of let them drop, which remember on all of our hypertrophy type movements, if that's your focus, is to really own the eccentric and control it through that movement. Then finally wrapping up is bicep work. So I'll do a dumbbell preacher curl today. On my other pull day, I just do a standing dumbbell curl. So this one, it does have a little bit more loading. In shoulder flexion, you're gonna get a little bit more shortening of the bicep. With this one, at the very bottom of the movement, I allow a little bit of pronation to happen. For one, it just is relieving on the elbow joint. I think it also is a little bit safer for you not tearing a bicep off. And you can even take that dumbbell that's on the inside and just let it have a slight dead stop pause on the bench, just to also have a little bit more of a safety aspect around the movement, because you are at a pretty loading that lengthened part very heavy for a preacher curl. A lot of guys have torn biceps off doing stuff like that. So just really trying to control that transition from eccentric to concentric is important. But also when you're in this slight pronation, as you curl and cue supination, part of the biceps roll is flex the elbow and supinate the forearm. So you get this really great like aspect around cueing the bicep to contract. So the connection with biceps seems to, for myself, like work really well with that cueing. I do 3 sets here, stay in the 12 to 15 rep range on these. Then my final movement of the day is a dumbbell hammer curl, focusing on the brachialis. And do these single arm, just allows a little bit better arm path and alignment for myself. And just 2 sets, still staying around like 12 to 15 rep range. So volume wise for this session, 9 sets of back, 2 sets of direct trap work, 3 sets of direct rear delt work, and I just count it as 5 sets of bicep work. So that rounds out that session. And I did get some questions in, some like quick fire ones just from some people that commented last time. And again, if you have some questions you'd like to me answer at the end of these videos, be happy to do it. Someone had brought up, what about leaving fruit in on prep? Should you leave it in or pull rice? And I am a proponent for, if you're dieting and you have fruit in place, to leave in the most micronutrient dense foods and also voluminous foods that have fiber for as long as you can. So rather than remove your fruit, leave your fruit in and remove some of the starches and grains. So just pull rice down and keep the fruit in place, and you'll have a much more palatable, enjoyable prep. And another question was about if you need mid-trap, kind of this middle back area. And this is a great time to answer this question because we just went over it on using like the prime extreme row. If you don't have a prime extreme row, like a chest supported T-bar row still has like great application here. Now, to get extra work for the mid traps, Kelso shrugs are phenomenal. The mid traps roll is retraction of those scapulas. So after you finish doing your row, if you fail, just finish and continue doing some Kelso shrugs to further fatigue the traps, because usually your traps aren't fully fatigued and to a close failure point after just a normal row. So it's an easy way to add in some more volume directly for if you need mid traps. And last one was, is it needed to use metformin when you are using exogenous insulin? And I would encourage you to check out the podcast that Luke Miller and I did, all on metformin. We also did one all on insulin. Listening to those, you should gather a lot, because there's a lot of context that makes it hard to answer that question quickly for you. But think of these compounds as individual ones. You wouldn't necessarily have to, but if you are an enhanced bodybuilder, I think it makes a lot of sense to utilize something like metformin or berberine as just a prophylactic to help with insulin sensitivity and also lowering inflammation and oxidative stress, improving your lipid panel. So I think there's benefits that go along with it with low dose application, okay? And also with metformin in mind, if you are using insulin, you're probably someone that also is using a lot of food in place as well. So having something that's also working with insulin sensitivity when you are having very high insulin demand would make sense. But anyway, thank you everybody for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next time.